But I want to talk to us today about the issue of loneliness. And the issue of loneliness is something that we deal with in our generation. Mother Teresa says this: the most terrible poverty is loneliness and the feeling of being unloved. And she goes on to say, of all the diseases that I have known, loneliness is the worst. Now, what do we mean by loneliness in this place? What do we mean when we say that a person is lonely or is experiencing feelings of loneliness? What are we talking about? All right, loneliness is an unpleasant feeling, an emotional response to a perceived lack of social interaction or isolation. It is an emotional or mental discomfort or uneasiness resulting from one being alone or perceiving oneself to be alone. It is an emotional distress that results due to inherent needs for intimacy and companionship not being met. It is an unpleasant and unsettling experience that results from a perceived discrepancy between an individual's desired and actual social relationships. There is a difference between being alone and being lonely. Now, I can be alone but not feel lonely, but I can also be in a crowd but feel extremely lonely. Loneliness is not an issue of whether or not there are people around you. Loneliness is an issue of whether or not somebody knows you. You see, all of us desires to be known and to be known by someone else. Someone whom we are able to be comfortable with, to be able to share our lives with, to be able to be ourselves and yet not be rejected by the people around us. All of us desires for people to see the real us, not some kind of person that we put up on the internet or someone that we curate carefully in terms of our social media feed of the life that we are trying to present. But people who know us, and despite knowing us, choose to stay with us. Now, being alone by itself, it's not something that's bad. As mentioned, it is two separate things. And in fact, seasons of being alone is actually helpful and beneficial for you. And I'll touch on that more later in the next few chapters. But just to give you a thought, Jesus often withdrew himself from the crowd to be alone with the Father and to be alone to pray. Especially before he was making any major decisions, before he was meeting any emotional turmoil or going through a very rough period. He always learned to draw himself aside. All around us, we know of people who are lonely, and we know of people who might be struggling with loneliness. Now, we have to understand this, that loneliness has an effect on us, not only on our emotional side of things, but it can take a toll on both our emotional as well as our physical health. We're going to share with you, some of the effects of loneliness. All right? One, it can lead to high blood pressure, heart disease, obesity, a weakened immune system, anxiety, depression, Alzheimer's disease, a cognitive decline, and even death. And so the question is this, how do we solve the issue of loneliness in our generation? Can I suggest to you today, that the way for us to solve the issue of loneliness is by improving the quality of our relations. God did not create us to be alone, He meant for us to be in a community, which is why cell group is important, which is why the Bible says do not forsake the gathering of the saints, especially as you see the last days coming. And so the question that I want us to ask ourselves today is this: does somebody know you? And do you know somebody? And so in our midst today, perhaps there are two groups of us that are in this place, One group are those of you who are dealing with loneliness, And the other group of you, you are not dealing with loneliness. But all of us have something to learn, And we want to dive into the Word today, to study a few relationships or friendships that are in the Bible and learn the lessons that we can from the Bible. Now, first and foremost, I want to address those of you who are dealing with feelings of loneliness. And the three categories are this, okay? The first is that it is self-inflicted. Now, self-inflicted doesn't mean that you purposely go and inflict it on yourself, okay? Doesn't mean you take a nail and then you start poking yourself, and then you're like, yes, I enjoy being lonely. I'm doing this to myself. Our loneliness are caused because we shut out other people in our lives. Now, sometimes we might be lazy to interact with other people. One of the things to ask yourself, okay, is are there anything in my life, okay, that's hindering me from reaching out to other people and to build relationships, okay? And if it's something that's self-inflicted, okay, my advice to you is this, okay, don't isolate, don't cut people off. Be willing to try to be open and to be vulnerable. And to be open and vulnerable means that there might be the possibility that people can hurt you, okay? Don't be lazy, put yourself out there, and put off off-putting behaviors, okay? Especially if they have to do with your character. Now, personality is fine, okay, but if it's something to do with your character, it is good for you to work on it, okay? Proverbs chapter 18, verse 24 says this, okay? He who makes friends must himself be friendly, okay? And so for those of us who are struggling with loneliness, okay, ask yourself, am I being friendly to those around me, okay? Because sometimes you may have inadvertently become unsociable because of certain hurts that have happened in your life or because of certain things that have happened in your life. Not by any of your fault, okay? But because as you're stumbling through life, certain things have hurt you, which were not caused by others, okay? And so if that is you, continue to remain being open and vulnerable and to make yourself friendly so that you can make friends. Now, the other one, okay, is of course when other people hurt us, okay? So there's self-inflicted and then there's others inflicted, okay? It might be your own shame and your own fear and insecurities, okay, that's preventing you from reaching out because you are afraid that if people see who you really are, that they will not like who you really are. And that whole sense of rejection and fear of rejection, okay? And if that is you, okay, and you have been hurt by others before, okay, learn to seek help, learn to remove yourself from the situation. Consider perhaps changing another group of friends. Allow God to heal you. And sometimes God can bring different people into your life to heal you as well. Through a relationship that you thought is not possible, but because of that friendship, it heals you. The last one is this, okay, that it is God inflicted. Now, I know this sounds very convoluted, okay, like how can it be that God causes us to feel lonely in that sense, okay, but sometimes God works in mysterious ways, okay. He is fond of using unpleasant circumstances to force us to grow and to change our ways so that it will conform with His plans, okay. So if you're feeling lonely today, okay, you need to consider what is going on in your life, okay. You need to ask yourself what is happening, okay. If it's not because someone else has hurt you and then you have shut yourself up, or not because you're not putting yourself out there, then why are you feeling this sense of loneliness in that sense? And then you need to ask yourself, is it because God is shutting certain doors so that He can deal with certain things in our lives? Again, because sometimes God can deal with us best when we are in a place where we are alone and are able to seek Him. Most of the time we hear God the best when we are alone with Him. Yes? And sometimes God allows that to happen so that we will learn to seek Him and so that He will be able to do or work through certain things in our life. Now, one of the things is this, okay, sometimes God chooses to do these things, okay, because maybe for a season, okay, God has allowed certain friendships in your life, okay, that was helpful and useful for you to walk through certain situations. But so much so that this has become a crutch in your life, okay? And God wants to build you in such a way where you're able to rely on Him, okay? And so sometimes the reason why we are feeling lonely, okay, can come from external factors. Sometimes it can come from internal factors, but sometimes it can also come because God is doing something within your life, okay? And so if that is you, okay, and you know that God is doing something in your life, okay, learn to identify what it is and learn to partner with God on what it is and allow God to do what is necessary. Okay, seek Him, go into a time of solitude, okay, but not isolation. Okay, and again, I want to stress this, okay, that there is a difference between going into solitude and being in isolation. When you isolate yourself, you are cutting yourself off from the world. Not intentionally, but because you are shutting them out because of the potential harm that may happen. Okay, but when you go into a time of solitude, it's so that you can be recharged, refreshed, and refueled for the new season. Regardless of what you're going through, and it might be unique to you, okay, it doesn't mean that you cannot surround yourself with friends. Okay, and so these are the three things for those of you who are dealing with loneliness, okay. But for those of you who are not dealing with loneliness, okay, then the question is, what then should I do? Because those around me might be going through this in their lives, okay. And so what should we do as friends, okay? What should we do as cell members, cellmates, or even as schoolmates as you see your friends who are dealing with loneliness in their lives, okay? And the question to us is this, okay, how can I become a better friend to those around me, and how do I help those around me by being a good friend? All right, and so we want to look into a few persons' life today, okay, mainly just two, Jonathan and David, as well as Job, okay? And so we want to learn from the life lessons, okay, from these different individuals. Okay, so basically Jonathan and David are best friends, okay? And so David met Jonathan when he first slayed Goliath, okay? And then when he met Jonathan, okay, God bound their hearts together, and they became good friends, okay? In fact, the Bible tells us this, okay, that their hearts were bound as one, okay? And then they made a covenant with each other, okay? And then Jonathan gave David, okay, his belt, his armor, his shield, his sword, etc., etc. Jonathan was the supposed heir to the throne. He is the son of King Saul. Saul is the king of Israel at that time, and he was the firstborn of King Saul. Out of 8 sons, he was the firstborn, okay, which means that he was supposed to inherit the throne. Okay, so who Jonathan is? Jonathan is the Prince Charles to Queen Elizabeth. All right, so Jonathan is supposed to be next in line in terms of inheriting the throne. Okay, and so the first lesson that we learn, okay, from the life of Jonathan and David is this, okay. First, they had a loving relationship. Okay, 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 1 says this, now when he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own. Okay, in 2 Samuel chapter 1 verse 26 it says this, I am distressed, my brother, you have been very pleasant to me. Your love to me was wonderful, surpassing the love of women. This shows us the depth of the relationship that they had back in the days of Jonathan and David, where men could love men in a platonic way, without any shame, and are able to form deep relationships with one another. Now, the first lesson that we learn from Jonathan and David is this, okay, that they learned to build deep relationships, and they loved each other wholeheartedly, okay. They frequently express their love to one another. In fact, in the Bible, if you flip through 1 Samuel chapter 18 down to maybe about 23, you'll see that many times they reaffirm their covenant with each other and that they love one another. And Proverbs chapter 17 verse 17 says this, okay, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. Another verse that tells us about love is this, John 15 verse 13, greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends. See, love is a very powerful emotion, but it is not only just an emotion. Love is a commitment in itself as well. It is more than just a warm, fuzzy feeling that you feel on the inside. It is you willfully, mindfully, with all of your heart, loving someone, okay? And the Bible tells us this, okay, that a friend loves at all times, which means that even when you see your friend at his worst, you do not leave your friend, because a friend loves at all times. And we could all do with friendship that's like that even at our worst, that people still love us, that people still care for us, and people don't leave us. Now aim to be a friend like that. Aim to be a friend who doesn't go, who doesn't leave when the going gets tough, or when ugly truths are shown, that you don't leave. Now the second thing is this, that their love was selfless. Jonathan knew that David was supposed to be king. That even though he was supposedly the rightful heir to the throne, he knew David was to be king, and he gave his title and his position over to David willingly. He served him willingly. He honored him willingly. 1 Samuel chapter 23, verse 17. And this was Jonathan saying to David, "Do not fear, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I shall be next to you. Even my father Saul knows that." Imagine the amount of humility that Jonathan had. He was an accomplished man in his own right. In fact, in the verses before David even slays Goliath, it said that 1,000 men was put to his charge, which means that Jonathan, in by himself, he was an accomplished military leader himself. He has other exploits as well that you read about in the Bible, where he climbed the garrison, and he slayed all the people on the garrison. And he had his own faith exploits, But he learned to honor one another, And in Romans chapter 12, verse 10, it says this, "Be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love, in honor, giving preference to one another." Is your friendship one that is selfless? One that prefers the other over yourself? Fighting to give honor to one another. See, Jonathan was meant to be the rightful heir, but he gave preference to another. And the third lesson that we can draw from Jonathan and David's life is this, that he was loyal to David, and so was David loyal to Jonathan. Now, of course, in 1 Samuel chapter 18, and in the bulk of these verses, you'll keep seeing how Jonathan protected David, how he would speak up on behalf of David to his father. When his father wanted to kill David, Jonathan would stand in between the father and David and say, "Why are you doing this?" And then persuade the king to revert from his mind of doing harm to David. You see, a friend is one who is loyal, is someone who will stand up, speak up, and fight for you, even when others are not standing. His father was a scary man, And not only was he a scary man, he was the king of Israel with all authority that has been given to him. But yet he stood up for David, even if it might cost him something. And Jonathan was a loyal friend to David, warned him of the dangers, or when Saul was about to kill him, he warned David in advance. And it is the same thing, that as loyal friends, that you not only deal with people at the good times, but you learn to correct each other in love. Friends speak up for one another. Friends stand up for one another. And friends help to stand together in the gap, to fight together. And Job and his 3 friends, And so Job, his 3 friends might not exactly be the best example, because there are certain things that they did while Job was down and out that might not necessarily be right, and the things that they said might not necessarily be right. But so what happened is that Job is a man who really loves God. God has blessed him with a lot of finances, a lot of horse, camel, donkey, sheep, the whole waterworks, God has also blessed him with a lot of children, And so one day the devil came to God and said that, the only reason that Job is like that is because he's afraid of losing all the things that you have blessed him with. If you take these things away from him, he will definitely curse you. And so God said, fine, you can go ahead and test Job. You can do anything you want except to touch the life of Job. That is one thing that he cannot touch. And so cut the long story short, Job's kids died. All of his cattle and everything was lost, and he lost everything in one fell swoop. And so when his friends heard of it, this was what they did, and these are the things that I want us to learn, not the rest of the things that they did, but these 3 things that they did, which serves as a lesson to us of what a good friend is. So let's read Job chapter 2, verse 11 to 13, and it says, "Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this adversity that had come upon him, each one came from his own place." They came from many different places, for they had made an appointment to come together and to mourn with him and to comfort him. Verse 12, "And when they raised their eyes from afar, they did not recognize him, and they lifted their voices and wept. And each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head towards heaven. So they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. And so these were the 3 things that they did. Okay, the first is that they came to him when he was suffering. Okay, and so this is the 4th lesson for us. Okay, that they went out of their way to make friendship and to be a friend. Okay, and the thing is this. Okay, being a friend takes time and effort. Okay, if you want to be a friend to someone, it's going to cost you something. Okay, and they came to him when he was suffering. Secondly, what they did was they empathized with him. When they saw him from afar, they mourned with him. Okay, they tore their robes and identified with his pain and mourned together with him. Okay, and the last thing is this. Okay, that they spent 7 days with him, just spending time with him and just being with him. And sometimes that's all you need to do. And there might be 2 groups of you here today. The first group are those of you who are dealing with a sense of loneliness in your life. You might be struggling with loneliness in your life. You might be struggling with depression or anxiety. Or you may even be suicidal in a certain sense. And you may think that you're in this alone. But can I tell you this? That you're not alone. That your leaders and I are here for you. And if you're struggling with suicide, depression, or anxiety today, please know that you're not alone and that you can talk to us. While we may not be able to understand everything, or rather, it is not that we will be able to understand everything, but we will strive to understand as much as possible. Jesus himself was no stranger to loneliness. Right? Imagine you being Jesus, okay? Your whole life, people around you, you are without sin, okay? And perhaps you might think like, Jesus, what a pleasant problem to deal with, you don't have sin. But probably it is something that's quite tormenting in a certain sense, wouldn't it be? Because, in Peter it describes Lot's experience in Sodom, okay, as being tormented day after day by the lawless deeds that he saw and heard. How much worse is it for Jesus, who was sinless, living in a world of sin? Okay, imagine what his childhood was like. Okay, he might have been someone who might have fit in, or he might have been someone who stuck out morally like a sore thumb. He was someone that stood at the temples and had a conversation with the Pharisees about the Bible, right, at 12 years old. So he might have stood out like a sore thumb. And perhaps his parents also couldn't understand him, nor were they able to protect him from other people's remarks or their mocking. And of course, Jesus' loneliness reached an apex when he was hanging on the cross for us, when he became sin, and when he was forsaken by his Father, and he was estranged by sinlessness and then by sin. And so Jesus knows and is able to understand. So in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16, it says this: "With confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that you may receive mercy and find grace to help with every need." To love another person is to see the face of God. And whether you are feeling lonely or whether you are not feeling lonely, okay, we all can be a friend to those around us, so that together we can make this world a less lonely place. That together we can be the answer to the problem of loneliness by first having Christ in our hearts and shedding that love that's in our hearts to those around us.